Chapter 13, Ally of the King. Friday, 10:30 a.m., in the marble square of Finite Castle.
To the Creator King of the glorious capital city in Theopolis, from Acting Head Inspector Perceive in Finite Castle. Dear Creator King, in the lifetimes of the residents now residing within Finite Castle, no petition has ever been sent to you regarding an alliance or relationship with you that we know of. As opposed to existing under pernicious accuser, defeated and miserable, we are writing to you, dear Creator King. Finite Castle is besieged by a malignant force far more powerful than us. Our wall is not enough to resist indefinitely. Creator King, we ask for deliverance from the accuser, knowing that we are not strong enough in and of ourselves to fight him and win on our own. Please send your forces to deliver us, Creator King. We desire to establish a relationship with you that will never end. We await your salvation and your deliverance. Speaking for Finite Castle, most respectfully, Acting Head Inspector Perceive. Resident Leary, Resident Rye, Resident Aspire, Resident Grace, Resident Presume, Resident Candid, and Resident Resolve are all in agreement on this. So, how does that sound? Does it sum up your sentiments?
Head Inspector Perceive, I believe it is just about right.
Resident Grace agreed.
That is good, Perceive, but you did make us all sound a little desperate.
True, Rye, but this is a difficult situation, and I wanted to make sure the letter sounded sincere when it was delivered to the king. Resident Resolve, will you do the honor of taking it there?
Yes, Head Inspector.
Resident Resolve said, taking it in hand. Everyone watched him as he went over to the stairs leading up to the Gate of Sight, and sprinted up them. Once he was out of sight, the conversation in the marble square continued, but the topic changed. Once again, apart from the continual boom-boom, there was peace in the castle. Peace of a sort they had not known before.
You know, compared to the residents in castles, we have strange and marvelous powers.
Constant remarked.
We can disappear from their sight in an instant, and there are things we can do that they cannot dream of doing, such as pass through walls and lift what they would term very heavy objects. Yet despite this, we are not always able to guide them in the right way, and this has to do with the power of choice.
There was a time long ago when Robust was seeking to influence a prominent ruler, and he strove with that leader against pernicious accuser himself for 21 days. He told me later that it was only the personal intervention of Creator King that made his mission successful. It is their choice that settles the matter. When they choose to trust the king over the enemy, this long war with the traitor is worth it.
I see we do not have to worry about Bold. I can see that those spies are too busy arguing, shivering, and sneezing to put up much resistance, even when guarded by one emissary.
Look there, replied Alien Zeal. Resolve is taking that petition to the Tower of Speech. It appears that the enemy has lost another victim. Glory and praise and honor to the king. Constant, I believe the honor is yours. Below them, Resident Resolve was nearing the Tower of Speech. Emissary Constant nodded and flew down unseen by any of the residents to the Gatehouse of Speech as Resident Resolve entered the tower. With the petition in hand, Constant flew like lightning to the glorious capital city, every part of her tingling with joy and excitement. Time unknown in the capital city. In the flower-filled gold and silver arbor, the lattice roof supported fruit vines, yet the glory of King Sovereign filtered through to mingle with the glory of Creator King, who was on the terrace. Creator King began to smile a glorious smile as he turned to Emissary Senshin.
You will soon have an errand. Inform the sentry to call for an assembling of an army. Finite Castle will soon need liberation. Emissary Constant will be here soon to deliver the news of Finite Castle rejecting pernicious accuser and of their petition to me. A SoulCastle has been saved. As it was years ago, the residents of Finite Castle have decided to put their trust in me.
No castle that has ever truly turned to you would have it any other way afterward. After you rescue them, they experience peace that they have never known before, even though they are subject to more frequent attacks for trusting you.
It is true that they will be attacked more often than before because they choose me. They are an even greater risk to Pernicious than before. Their loyalty, love, and devotion to me, often in other castles' field of vision, demonstrate that the enemy's lies are dangerous deceptions. He loses credibility and power when castles or people resemble me in sentiments and actions.
I'll go to meet Emissary Constant Creator King.
After Emissary Sentient left, the strains of a nearby company of emissaries singing could be heard with their crescendos peaking and harmonizing. Starting out small, the song rose like a breeze becoming a mighty gale. Numerous powerful voices blended as they rose and fell in honor and praise of the king. The sweet, hair-raising harmony continued as the Creator King looked in the direction of Finite Castle.
My king, the residents of Finite Castle have decided to call on you.
Constance said, handing the petition to the king.
I have most excellent news. You know of it already, but your subject Finite Castle has chosen to ask for deliverance and a relationship with you.
Nodding at Emissary Sentient, Creator King replied,
I believe our forces are ready. You may lead them when you are ready, Emissary Sentient.
Yes, Creator King, I would consider it an honor. We will leave immediately.
With that, they both bowed to the king and glided out of the room.
The time for liberation has come.
Friday, 11 a.m. The fountain in the marble square.
This has been a tremendous shift in who and what we put our trust into. Even though I was ardently against it in the beginning, I am thankful now to be preserved against Pernicious,
said Resident Rye.
Something I have wondered for some time is where the plaques came from and how they got here,
said Resident Candid.
Well, I haven't the faintest idea of where they came from or how they got here. All I know is that they've been here ever since I was born,
Resident Leary said.
Well, who knows how they got here, but I am glad they're here. They have preserved our wall and given us hope,
replied Resident Candid.
Well, Head Inspector Cautious is the oldest resident. Perhaps he knows how they got here,
replied Resident Aspire.
We'll have to ask him when he gets back.
You know, he told me once the story behind the plaques,
replied Resident Resolve.
What did he have to say?
Well, Larry, he told me that he had been less than encouraged that the subject had never come up. He said that when he was a young resident, I guess about the age of Resident Aspire here, he had been influenced by the elderly head inspector at that time. Revere, I think the name was. And that head inspector, I guess, had done with him, as he has with us, in encouraging us to read the plaques. Anyhow, that inspector had told him that there, what was it called? Oh, that there was a place called Sacred Mountain or Mount Sacred. All the plaques came from there.
Perhaps we, like Revere, with some from Victor Castle, could get some more plaques one.
Did the sun just become dim? Or was it me?
Resident Resolve asked, looking around. Several of the residents nodded their heads while others began to look around, as if searching for something they could hear but could not see. The wind began to blow stronger, and shortly thereafter, the boom-boom which had been constant for so long stopped abruptly. When it did, the residents all froze and began to exchange looks. Suddenly, the earth began to shake with a slight tremor. All that could be heard were hundreds of thousands of wings flapping at a blazing pace.
Is it possible that such a vast force exists?
Cried Resident Rye above the noise of the wings. The noise was almost deafening and continued for about 3 minutes. Suddenly it died away, and the resident stood looking around dazed. Collecting his wits, Head Inspector Perceive turned to Resident Aspire.
Aspire, could you run up and see what is out there? Come back and tell us as quickly as you can.
Resident Aspire took off like a rabbit and sped towards the stairs leading to the Gate of Sight. Racing up them, he arrived at the top, breathing hard. He looked over the wall and surveyed the ground below. After a minute, he started back and arrived breathless.
There is no one outside the wall in any direction as far as I can see. All that is out there are a bunch of battering rams which look as though they are hastily deserted. Pernicious Accuser has been defeated by Creator King. If we always trust him, we can never go wrong.
The attack had lasted several days, and during that time, no one had gotten much sleep. Nerves had been strained, and everyone had been worried. When Resident Aspire finished, several residents sat down on the fountain seats with the air of being unable to take in what had just happened. Resident Rye hugged Resident Grace, who had tears in her eyes. Resident Leary slapped Resident Resolve's back. Head Inspector Perceive put his hand on Resident Aspire's shoulder, who nodded with a quiet smile. Junior Resident Astute smiled and let out some breath. Resident Presumed looked relieved and slapped Resident Candid on the back in a good-natured way.
So there are a bunch of battering rams outside?
Replied a delighted Resident Grace.
It has just occurred to me that more furniture in this castle would not go amiss, and
She stopped suddenly upon seeing Resident Resolve stepping towards the stairs leading to the Tower of Speech. Resident Perceive also began to walk in that direction as if he knew what Resident Resolve was doing. Other residents saw where Resident Perceive was walking and followed, although some did not know why.
What are we doing?
Resident Rye whispered to Resident Candid.
I do not know, Rye,
he replied. After a minute, most of them were on the stairs. After another minute, they were stepping into the Tower of Speech amid questioning looks from a few who still did not know what was going on. Slowly, Resident Resolve got to his feet, and the others followed suit. When he did this, there were no more confused looks.
Dear Creator King, thank you for saving us.
Resident Resolve said reverently.
Forgive us for holding out against you, Creator King,
replied Resident Rye.
Protect us, Creator King, and may we always take shelter under your wings,
said Resident Leary.
Creator King, may we have our deepest friendship in you.
Help us to always trust you, Creator King,
replied Resident Grace.
We look forward to a relationship with you. In the name of Jesus, please give us new hearts. And thank you, Creator King,
said Head Inspector Perceive. Friday, 10:50 a.m. Outside the walls of Finite Castle. Colonel, our rams have made indiscernible advances since before Artifice took off.
What are you suggesting, Lieutenant? Even if hopeless, which this battle is not yet, all is not final. Our efforts must not be lessened at all, even in the shadow of defeat. Until forced to leave, we will fight with all the fireness that vengeance can muster. All the fury of hell that can be mustered must be put into battering this wall to find dust. Keep on it, Lieutenant. Run the troops to exhaustion if you have to. For any price is not too great in return for the misery, ruin, and death of Finite Castle.
Resident Resolve was seen in the Tower of Speech with a parchment. This does not bode well for us. This is unconfirmed, but it might be a communication.
Truly? I was unaware of this development. Nevertheless, keep on the attack as strong as ever.
They may have plaques, and with regard to the troops. At that moment, the lieutenant stopped talking. As he looked around, his breathing slowly increased as his eyes darted here and there. Colonel Devious caught his breath as his eyes suddenly became wide as the wind began to blow.
Prepare your sword, Lieutenant. We will have company soon. My troops, prepare your swords.
When Colonel Devious said this, all his troops, with sweat beginning to form on their foreheads, rigidly drew their swords. Suddenly the sun dimmed. Colonel Devious quickly and skillfully withdrew his large, sharp sword.
Lieutenant, you will stand your ground.
The earth shook as hundreds of thousands of glittering, shining emissaries flew towards the army of Colonel Devious. As the emissaries flew, they began unsheathing their swords. emissaries Sentient and Constant sped on, leading the massive force.
Troops, you must stand your ground.
We have to retreat.
Stay where you are. I order you to stay.
The earth was shaking with the massive emissaries heading towards them. Colonel, we cannot win against such numbers.
All right then, retreat.
As the massive emissaries flew even closer, the troops took off here and there, flying as if their lives depended on speed. As the emissaries were almost upon Devious, the lieutenant, shaking all over, bolted away. Glancing back at the forces almost upon him, Colonel Devious turned and flew like lightning before the vast army of emissaries. With the emissary army at his back and giving a hard chase, Colonel Devious flew away with the burning desire and vow to return and heap vengeance on Finite Castle, while also sweating in his urgency to fly as far away as he could. Utterly defeated and furious, Colonel Devious continued to fly with all his strength and energy as the emissaries continued to give chase. Friday, 11:15 a.m. The walls of Victor Castle. The cheers exploded inside the walls of Victor Castle as those on the wall shouted that the enemy attacking Finite Castle had been defeated. On the wall, looking in the direction of his home, Head Inspector Cautious had mist in his eyes. Looking over at Resident Alert, he nodded, unable for the moment to speak for the intense sentiments he was feeling within.
I will understand if you want to be on your way at once.
Yes, Resident Alert. I need to return to my home.
You have had reason to be worried, and yet you have remained calm.
I know that all things are in the hands of Creator King. Therefore I can have peace in any case, knowing that he rules over all.
To those who are near in heart to the King, peace of mind is a precious gift indeed.
Yes, it is. Well, I'll be heading off this wall and out of the gate on my way home. Thank you for your invitation, and perhaps our castles will have more contact. Before I leave, I was wondering what you could tell me about the castle that is going to be built before too long. I have heard some of the residents in this castle speak of it. Have you thought of a name for this new castle? Or is that a premature question?
Well, we will probably give it a name when it is finished. The thing is that we do not have all of the resources and manpower to construct a new castle. Since you have been here, and particularly as Finite Castle must have a treaty with the king by now, as we do, some of our residents have suggested that Finite Castle might like to join us in this venture. Some of the residents from here will likely relocate to this new castle.
Who would the head inspector be? Since Victor Castle is heading this up, you should be the one to choose who he should be.
Well, after Head Inspector Noble, the resident who has the most experience and seniority is Resident Ponder. At any rate, when you arrive back at Finite Castle, you can discuss it with the residents there. It is likely that if you decide to set out on this joint venture, that one or more of your residents will be permanent residents of this new castle.
Well, I can think of one or two who might be inclined to do that. At any rate, I will discuss it with the residents in my castle, and perhaps on or before a trip to Mount Sacred, one of the residents from Finite Castle will get back to you on that, regarding what the consensus is.
Well, that sounds good. I know some of the residents here are looking forward to a trip to Mount Sacred. At any rate, let us know what the consensus in Finite Castle is when you can.
Yes, I will do that. Well, I should get going if I want to get there before sundown. Thank you for your hospitality. I guess I will see you later, Resident Alert.
Yes. See you later, Head Inspector Cautious.
Friday, 7 p.m. A lonely, shrouded forest. The day was beginning to fade. Shadows betrayed the forms of trees. The forest was not a happy place, nor was it where Colonel Devious had carried out his secret observations of Finite Castle. His troops were spread throughout the forest, all of them recuperating from a devastating defeat. A dejected colonel stood by Pernicious Accuser, his figure drooping. No battlements remained to them, and no weapons of war. All would have to be rebuilt. A whip could be heard in the distance.
Radiant Ruler,
The colonel replied, hesitating.
I cannot express my depth of disappointment for what has happened. I cannot think of anything more I could have done, or the troops. There does not seem to be anyone to blame except the enemy.
And the weapon of guilt?
Well, from what we have gleaned, it was used several times, but it was quickly derided by residents who trusted the enemy.
I will not demote you since you have done your part as well as could be expected. There are others who will bear the blame, for it was their inaction that contributed to our defeat. I am given to understand that the spies in Finite Castle made the worst blunders imaginable.
How could our spies, being vastly superior to those residents in intellect, strength, guile, and willpower, not prevail, and worse, yet be careless around a formidable head inspector? If I said it once to them, I have said it many times. You cannot underestimate a castle, especially one where the head inspector has been requesting the wear of wisdom from the enemy for years. They clearly went in there with no conception that they might foil. I would hope that, where I espy a different operation of spying, and a different outcome will have ensued. Averse and adroit certainly have much to answer for.
You are right, Colonel. Sneaking around at night for cautious to see them as he hid in the shadow of a tower. It seems that through the enemy's supplement of wares that a head inspector, a resident no less, has managed to outdo 2 spies. Not noticing that 2 residents were on crucial visits to Faint Castle and Asunder Castle was a blaring mistake. It was this mistake of not noticing or reporting these seemingly unimportant details to me which to a large degree rendered Artifice, who is an exceptional spy, useless.
I know, Radiant Ruler. That Revere was the last surviving resident years ago when we attacked, and we were able to deceive every resident in the following generation because of our wares being so effective. Yes, and until Perceive, Grace, Resolve, and now Aspire and Hope were poisoned by Cautious, and up until this attack. The success of our wares and rumors could be seen in the attitudes of preceding and present residents who outnumber these 4 residents, particularly in Rye and Candid.
Yes, Colonel. The only unfortunate snag was Revere living long enough to poison Cautious. If not for that, things would be different. Well, there is one thing for it. Keep sending malicious wares from Asunder Castle to both Faint Castle and Finite Castle. It is the best we can do at the moment until our next attack.
I am sure that Faint Castle petitioned the enemy to help out Finite Castle,
said Colonel Devious somewhat bitterly.
Oh, of course Faint Castle petitioned for Finite Castle. That is why Lord Mysterious was in Finite Castle. Artifice told me that he saw Lord Mysterious and it petrified him. Faint Castle shall pay dearly for their intrusion in this attack. I will see to it that they are recompensed for their part in this treachery.
Here come the failures from Victor Castle, along with you-know-who.
Hello, Colonel. Greetings, Radiant Ruler. I have finished their corporal punishment.
Yes, Subvert. Bring them here.
The 3 spies from Faint Castle have at last been too ineffective to continue in Victor Castle, so they left. They crawled back here, and upon arriving here not too long ago, their punishment commenced. Until our agent, who most recently infiltrated Faint Castle not long ago, their fading influence has accomplished nothing against Lord Mysterious. It is absurd, unnerving, and irritating that the enemy's work in Faint Castle so quickly render our spies useless and fading.
Colonel Devious replied. 3 former spies from Victor Castle were brought forward and shoved to the ground before Pernicious Accuser and Colonel Devious. At first they dared not look up, and they trembled.
I am not sure that your future stations are proper recompense for your negligence and incompetence.
The three former spies scrambled to their feet and faced Pernicious. They looked penitent, contrite, and miserable.
Nothing can ever convey our shame and reproach, radiant ruler,
said one spy with his head drooping.
Before any trust will be put in you again, you will remain privates for years to come.
With that, he nodded at Colonel Devious. He in turn stepped up to them and reached out to rip the patches, signifying the rank of spies, off their sleeves. They cringed back as he stepped forward and then flinched as the patches were stripped off them.
Lieutenant, incorporate them in the troops. At the bottom. Leave at once. I shall be relieved when I no longer see your faces,
he said to the three demoted spies. The three demoted spies wasted no time but sped away as fast as they could. As if trying to control himself, Pernicious glanced in the direction of Finite Castle.
Faint and Finite Castle will no doubt be petitioning for a Sunder Castle now.
They have no hope, Radiance. Resident Sharp is the only resident who trusts the king. A Sunder Castle will always be your slave, and you will have the pleasure one day of watching it die in misery without any hope. Turning to the lieutenant with a piercing, icy look, Pernicious replied,
Are you so sure, Lieutenant? If such is not the case, you may have to answer for it someday. I have been deeply wronged. I vow vengeance upon Finite Castle. I will yet torture them and hear their cries of despair as they die bereft of hope. Cursed be the king, cursed be his intervention, and cursed be my confinement to the land of castles. Cursed be the castles who the king made in his likeness. Cursed be the plaques. If the wretched residents of Finite Castle trek to so-called Sacred Mountain, then I will be there with every device of delay, harassment, deterrent, detour, peril, and delusion that I have. They must be prevented from acquiring more plaques at all costs. At all costs, they must be prevented from becoming like the enemy. They must not be given new hearts, or our work will be 10 times harder. They must not learn about, or worse, proliferate, information about the 3 cursed messengers of Section 14 in the last book of the Cursed Plaques. All my great power, cunning, and fierce wrath will be spent before I see them become friends with the enemy Creator King. Everything I can do, I will do to separate them and prevent this friendship. They will never be friends with the king, but will die lost, distrusting him. Whatever fate I have, they will share.